Chapter 9 continued. Paragraph 142. All things in heaven, or to the spiritual and celestial minds, are real, and they are real to the extent in which their minds are receptive of the light of life. This light reveals to them the uses of the various objects which are continually being brought forth into existence, and the means by which these creations are effected. By this revelation, what would otherwise present itself under a false appearance is at once or spontaneously converted into a real appearance. All the sensuous objects which coexist in the appearance of space, all their changes which impart to the life the appearance of progression, are precisely the same to them as they are to the sentient faculties of the natural man. It is the light of life within the spiritual mind that effectively prevents them from thinking of them in the same way. No such fallacy as a belief in the externaity of space or the independency of time can find an entrance into their minds. All traces of the non-real is obliterated as if it had never been. They could not think as man thinks without falling from the heavenly sphere in which all thoughts, though indefinitely various, partake alike of the reality of truth, and in which the representative world is, as to all its forms, alive, by being connected in their perceptions and in their affections also with the divine life. Nor is this confused to particular kinds of fallacies, such as those that are involved in space and time of the natural man. It enters universally into every thought and transforms it into one of an entirely different kind, which in the highest heaven is so completely discriminated from natural thoughts as to have nothing in common with them except the sensuous images on which they all rest. Paragraph 143. Again, were angels and good spirits to be led by their sensuous impressions and to think in space and time, they would think and believe that they had a life distinct and apart from the divine life, for so to the sentient faculties it appears. Sensuously, the connection and dependence can neither be seen or felt, and therefore the natural mind can neither understand nor admit that there is such a connection or dependence. There is beside an inherent desire, where sensualism predominates in the will as well as the intellect, that all powers should originate, where they all centre, in the self. Self being the god of the sensualist, he yields readily to the insane fantasy that his conscious life must be self-educed and self-dependent, and he feels the utmost repugnance not only to the admission but even to hear of his life being continually derived from another and not his own. In conversations with such sensuous spirits, our author informs us that they have been told that they could gain nothing if they were, as they supposed, an external space, and if their life were, as they supposed, it to be distinct from the divine life and independent of it. For, upon the supposition that there actually was a spatial world distinct from themselves, they still could have no more than the sensuous images of such a world presented to their minds, and these images they might have and actually do have just as fully and as perfectly without the hypothetical space and its materialism substratum, as with it, and that as for their life, their sentient consciousness would be the same, whether derived or underived. But by seeing and admitting it to be derived, they would be in possession of the truth, for their thoughts would agree with what actually is, instead of being under a delusion in which the conclusions of their mind are unreal and dead. Paragraph 144. This then is the difference between the real and the non-real, a difference which it is of no slight importance clearly to understand, since essentially it includes the chief, if not the whole difference between the two representative worlds. The spiritual world is a real world because it appears to the perception of heavenly beings, or to those whose thoughts flow in a spiritual channel, to be just what in its constitution it really is, the effect of a conflux of spiritual or mental causes, which causes consist of associated minds, all of them imperfectly but harmoniously receptive of the one divine life. But compared with this, which is the truth, the natural world is to the natural man, or to him whose conceptions of nature agree with the fallacies of the sensuous appearance, not real. As phenomena, indeed, they are both alike, for to the senses they both seem as if they were extraneous to the thinking being. But the one is real and the other is not, precisely because the light of life in the one is not obscured or extinguished by the voluntary prostrations of the mind before the delusions of the sense, which is altogether the case with the other. There is indeed a way, and a way pointed out by our author, of giving reality to the objects of this world's light, and that is by letting in the light of heaven upon them. Not that the natural current of human thought can be either continuously or permanently changed. To change it altogether would be to pass into another life. It is, in fact, that which the natural man calls death. But it can, as he says, be so far and so often changed as the objects of this world's light can be made adequately and correspondentially to conjoin themselves with those states of mind which belong to the light of heaven. The extent of such conjunction may, and most probably will be, very limited, and its quality very far from pure. We may not be able to see the truth continuously as an unbroken stream of light, so as to think no otherwise than after a spiritual manner. While we are living as to our minds interiorly connected with spheres of natural and even a sensuous kind, we can at best but only catch the beam, as it were, by pulsatory glimpses. But imperfect though this insight into truth must necessarily be, of this we may rest assured, that so to think is to enter intellectually the spiritual world, and to give reality and life to that which otherwise must needs remain lifeless and unreal. Paragraph 145. Heavenly beings, and especially those of the highest heaven, the inmost state of whose life is one of love to the Lord, and of love for one another, and the strength and the lucidity of whose rational perceptions are proportionate to the purity of their love, have at once an exquisite and comprehensive insight into the correspondency between their worlds of affection and thought, and the objects which flow forth into their sentient faculties. They know at once their signification, that is, they have a clear and spontaneous insight given them as to the states of mind in themselves and others, of which they are the representative outbursts. In the truth of the correspondency between spiritual causes and representative effects, they perceive their reality from its inmost ground. So completely do they think of all sensuous phenomena in their spiritual causes and ends, that they serve to awaken no other thoughts but such ends and causes. No natural relations, all of which in themselves are mere appearances, can enter the field of their thought, to cast their mists over the exceeding brightness and beauty of the scene. But instead of the fallacy of appearances, a world of spiritual realities is unfolded to their reason. They see the sensuous objects indeed in indefinite variety, but they see them as the exponents of relations in the living forms of mind. They see things as they are, and therefore they are to them most real, and they connect them with the infinite and eternal Lord as their cause, operating in their minds, and therefore they are alive. They cannot think as men are accustomed to think, for the light of truth is ever present in their minds, and they are no longer liable to be ensnared by the fallacies which darken and deaden the minds of those who think in space and time. In paragraph 146. It is in consequence of the unreal aspect under which this world is presented to the natural mind that the correspondencies between the objects of the senses and the various and often conflicting spheres of human minds are not at once perceived, but must be learnt by rote. Thinking in space and time and not above them, the natural man has no insight into their signification, and even by those who, in consequence of the partial opening of their spiritual minds, have some glimmerings of interior truth, the ground of the signification is but rarely understood, far less interiorly perceived at the time of the appearance. This defect is an inevitable concomitant to all mixed modes of thought. As the light arises in the mind, early impressions are found to be erroneous and have all to be reversed. By slow degrees, the objects of this world's light are brought to conjoin themselves adequately and correspondentially to those states of mind which belong to the light of heaven, and to the extent, and according to the quality of such conjunction, the truth of correspondency becomes rationally perceptible, and the heaven-instructed mind is able to see that this world of space, with its material furniture of aggregated atoms, was in his former conceptions indeed unreal, because it was not such as he had supposed it to be, but the very contrary. Instead of material atoms and their relations being the causes of thoughts and affections of the mind, or giving occasion to them, by a harmony pre-established between them, he will then perceive that they are all comprehending the various forms of matter, and the space in which they are said to exist no other and no more than the effects of spiritual or mental causes. As he awakes from the dream of imagining that matter had a power impressed upon it at creation, and which it continues to retain, he opens the eyes of his spiritual reason to perceive that the existence of the world is identical with its perpetual subsistence from God, and its preservation is no other than a continual act of creation. No longer a slave to his sensuous impressions, which had taught him that his life of thought and of love was distinct from the divine life and independent of it, or that he is his own God in all that he distinguishes him from the lower animals, he now knows and cherishes the imparted knowledge as a treasure beyond all price, that the conscious life of all created beings, the conscious life of the senses, as well as of the will and intellect, inflows from the Lord, and being finitely or imperfectly received by all created minds, is altogether distinct though not separated from the divine life. He no longer looks for the causes of his sensations beyond his own conscious mind in a fixed world of space, nor does he ignorantly suppose that the Creator is existing in every part of that space to carry on his works, as befits, in his materialistic views, the mighty architect of the universe. No such grovelling thoughts of the Lord his God can now find an entrance into his mind. He knows that there could be no extraneous space and independent time, and God not be present in the one and not co-endure with the other. And therefore he feels convinced that there can be no such independent space or time, such suppositions belonging to the unreal conclusions of the natural mind, conclusions which by their contrariety to the truth cause this world to be unreal, and that it is only adding to the number of fallacious appearances when God is imagined to fill the natural universe with his personal presence and to co-endure with natural time. Paragraph 147. These truths, clear and even self-evident as they are to the spiritual mind, will fail to convince him who is not yet emancipated from the trammels of sensuous thought. To him the world will still remain unreal, for it will still seem to be different from what it really is. The natural mind, by its modes of thinking in space and time, which is the same thing as thinking in the fallacy of appearances, cannot, but with great difficulty, shake off the opinions which early and long-continued habits have induced and strengthened. They lie like an incubus upon him, paralyzing the expansive force of reason and giving a painfully dreamy and uncertain cast to all his thoughts of God and of creation. So long as he continue in chain to the fallacies of sense, he will look no further than to the senses themselves for his proof that they do not deceive him, and will fancy that he has sufficient warrant from them for his belief in an external world of independent space, and that he may safely rely upon the evidence they offer. And yet upon other points which do not interfere with his belief in the independence of the natural world, he will not scruple to doubt, and even to deny, that any trust can be reposed in the information which they give. The senses instruct him, clear, as he thinks, beyond dispute, that the earth on which he stands is immovable, and that the sun revolves around it. And this the senses do to the full as much and as convincingly prove as that both sun and earth have an existence distinct from the eye that beholds them. And yet in the former case he will make no difficulty about reversing the sensuous fallacy, and in direct contradiction to the dictates of the senses will maintain that they do not teach him correctly, and that their judgment is reversed, and ought to be reversed, by an appeal to a higher tribunal. What, in another instance, does a sense of sight tell him, but that the objects that he sees are actually seen beyond or out of himself? They all seem to occupy their respective positions in space, which frequently appear to be of a vast magnitude. By day he sees the sun at a great distance, as he imagines, from himself, and by night he looks abroad into a space which, from the distance at which the stars are set, appears as if they were unlimited. And all this time, while he is wrapped in such sublime imaginings, he either knows not, or perhaps forgets, what the natural philosopher has told him, that he is beholding nothing more than a multitude of minute images, and that instead of an infinite space, the little retina on which his stars are all painted could be covered with the finger's point. But the most remarkable thing connected with this chaos of natural fallacies is this, that notwithstanding he has consented in this instance to admit, what his senses never could have taught him, that the only space which he sees or could see is actually less than the little organ in which he thinks it is presented. So strong is the power of sensuous thought, he will most probably still continue to think, at least in his working day thoughts, that he is looking out of himself into the expanse of nature, and in spite of his scientific theory, talk, when he intends to be more than commonly sublime, of infinite space, and of countless suns and planetary bodies with which it is filled. Here we have another instance of the fallacy of sensuous appearances, which he who is sufficiently instructed admits to be a fallacy, and that in this the sensation of externaity is not to be trusted. But notwithstanding this, he will still continue, if his mind be not enlightened by spiritual truth, to think he may rely with confidence upon his sensations, when they teach him that space has an existence distinct from those sensations, and that the earth was created before the conscious human being who was to dwell upon it. So contradictory are the conclusions to which many, if not most men arrive, who are swayed in part by the truths of science, and in part by the impressions of the sense. In some things they will think the sensuous phenomena to be of itself a sufficient proof that it is just as it seems to be, and in others they will maintain the appearance to be deceptive, and the truth to be in a directly contrary direction. Thus do they learn from the natural science to doubt and to deny the evidence of their senses in many things, although they still cling to them as the chief support of their belief in a world which is supposed to exist independent of all sensations. Paragraph 148. What then are those heavenly states of mind to which the objects of this world's light should be made adequately and correspondentially to conjoin themselves, and by which from fallacious they are to become real? What is it that imparts life to them and substitutes for the fallacy of sensuous thought the truths of spiritual reason? If the answer be not abundantly obvious from what has already been said, it is briefly this: the objects of this world's light comprehend all man's thoughts of his own conscious life, as that life is interpreted by the light of the natural mind, and all the objects of his spatial world as they are interpreted by the same light. His interpretation of these, so long as it remain uncorrected by a brighter light, is invariably an erroneous one, for he thinks of his own life that it is quite separate from the divine life of the Creator, and of his world of space that it has an existence apart from his own mind. Such are the objects of his natural thought when seen in this world's light. But the states of thought which belong to the light of heaven can correct these errors of the natural mind, and to the extent in which this is done, the objects become real and alive. For the light of heaven shows, notwithstanding the strength of the impression, that the life of man, whether it be the life of his will, his intellect, or his sensation, is not his own, but inflows or is communicated perpetually from God, and yet being received by men and angels from a finite or imperfect manner, it is distinct from the divine life. And that all the objects of the senses, which seem to enter the sentient faculties from without, are actually from within, being creations of the divine life, according to the law which determines the relationship between natural effects and spiritual causes, brought forth and exhibited by sensations in the ultimate faculties of the mind. To such extent, then, and as often as this, the right interpretation, be given to our own existence and to the objects of nature, they are converted in our minds into living realities, for they are connected with the light of life, and no longer seem to be what they are not. They are no longer the dead and unreal shadows which they were when seen in this world's light. In paragraph 149. After this, let no one suppose, though but for a moment, that the spiritualist is so insane as to deny the existence of the material world. Since the material world comprises everything that is an object of sight, hearing, smell, taste, or touch, no truth can be more self-evident than their existence. For to affirm their existence is to affirm neither more or less than that the objects of nature are objects, that is, that they are seen and heard, smelt, tasted, and touched. Of this there can be no question whatever. To doubt it would be to doubt our own existence as sentient beings. Of the existence of the natural, which is the same thing as the material world, the spiritualist no more doubts than the materialist. Their modes indeed of accounting for this world, which is common to both, though, is as different as day from night. The materialist assumes a space beyond the circle of his own knowledge with a substratum of matter, and out of these imaginary entities he constructs his dead, unreal world. This world he fills with a thing which he calls God, and having fashioned all of this, he falls down and worships the idol he has made. The spiritualist, on the contrary, connects his natural world with the light of life within his mind. Within his mind, and yet as distinct from his mind as infinite is from finite, he sees him as a divine love giving birth to every good affection of his will, and as a divine wisdom giving birth to every holy and elevated thought, and as the divine operator giving birth in the lowest faculties of the mind to space and time and the mighty universe of nature. He sees him as the one substantial life of all, the being of beings, the infinite without space, and the eternal without time.